adventure. Odysseus, yes, he's been through so much, so much. It's been from Troy to the Lotus Eaters to the Cyclops, to Calypso's Isle, to Nausicaa, to the island of Aeolus, Circe's enchanted isle. He's avoided the Sirens, the Scylla, and the Charybdis. And he's somehow eluded the fate of death. He's been to the underworld. And now with the help of Circe, who he was forced to bed with for a very, very long time. He's been away for a total of 20 years at this point. And his wife, Penelope, doesn't even know whether he ever will come back. And if he does come back, though, she's been weaving and unweaving her tapestry, or tapestry as I was told it's properly said. So the return to Ithaca, page 56. Let's find out. Okay. So Odysseus was helped out by the goddess, once mortal, now a goddess. What was her name? Was it Calypso? No, I didn't think it was Ino. That's who it was, Ino. But Ino helped out Odysseus and led him to this beautiful, beautiful island where King Alcinous was actually a very gracious host even before learning he was Odysseus, son of Laertes. But once he defeated Euryalus in a contest and showed that he was pretty much a badass, he revealed himself as the great Odysseus. And Alcinous said, "Hey man, your ship is ready. We Phaeacians use no steering oars, for our ships respond to our very thoughts and skim across the water with ease. Your long journey is coming to an end." So the return to Ithaca. The Phaeacian ship carried Odysseus swiftly and safely to Ithaca. When it arrived, Odysseus himself was in a sound slumber sent by the goddess Athena, and the sailors could not wake him, so they carried him ashore, still wrapped in his blanket, and laid him gently down, together with the rich gifts that he had received from King Alcinous. But the generous spirit of the Phaeacians did not please Poseidon. As a lesson to King Alcinous, Poseidon waited until the ship had reached the shore, the Phaeacian harbor, on its homeward journey, and then turned it into solid stone. And we can see that happening right here. It's being turned into solid stone, so that it sank to the bottom with all its crew, and no man can defy the gods. Meanwhile, Odysseus was on Ithaca, stirring from his spellbound sleep, All around him was a thick mist. "Where am I?" he groaned. "Have these Phaeacians betrayed me?" Athena, with her gleaming eyes, stepped out of the murk, and in the guise of a simple shepherd, she said, "You ask where this is," she said. "It is an isle whose fame has traveled far. You are in Ithaca." Odysseus could have shouted for joy, but instead, he said cautiously, "I have heard of the place." Then Athena took her own shape, a woman, tall and stately, with a beauty that shone from within. She laughed. "You think to hide your identity, but clever as you are, you cannot deceive me, for you are speaking to a god. You cannot keep anything from me." "If this is Ithaca," said Odysseus, "then I beg you, show it to me." So Athena dispelled the mist, and Odysseus fell to his knees to kiss the soul of his homeland. Then Athena told him of Penelope's plight. "Beset by so many bullying suitors, I will go to Sparta to fetch your son, Telemachus. At the court of King Menelaus he has earned men's respect, and he has matured into a fine man. Meanwhile you must go to the hut of the old swineherd, Eumaeus. He has remained loyal to Penelope and Telemachus, and will help us in our plans. But first, I will make sure that no one here will recognize you." And with that, Athena touched Odysseus with her wand. His hair turned gray. His skin became wrinkled and old. His eyes lost their brightness, and his body bent. His clothes turned into filthy old rags. The goddess gave him the staff of a beggar's bag, and he looked every inch like an aged vagabond. In this guise, Odysseus made his way to Eumaeus' hut. The swineherd's dog leapt out at him, barking and slavering, and nearly knocked him to the ground. But when they stopped at Eumaeus' command, "Welcome, stranger," the swineherd said. "If I can offer you any food or service, I will be happy to, in the hope that some other man will do the same for my noble master, Odysseus. Should he, by chance, be traveling poor and friendless through some strange land. Oh, that he would come home." And here we have Athena speaking with Odysseus, vouchsafing him the garb of a vagabond outside Eumaeus' hut, with his little dogs barking. Athena really has a penchant for Odysseus. "My friend," said Odysseus, "may the gods reward you with kindness and grant you your desire." And the pair settled down around the swineherd's fire to eat and talk and sleep, as old men do. The goddess Athena left Odysseus sleeping in the swineherd's hut and went swiftly to Sparta, to the bedside of Telemachus. She found him tossing and turning, tormented by worry for his father and mother. Her eyes flashed with sympathy. She told him, "It is time to take your leave of King Menelaus and return to Ithaca. do not waste a moment, and when you reach the shore, go straight to the hut of the swineherd Eumaeus. Telemachus roused himself. By dawn, horses were already harnessed to his chariot. He stayed only long enough to say farewell to his host before setting out for his ship. He stood at the prow, urging the ship across the waves, longing to be home. Meanwhile, Odysseus spent the day with Eumaeus, questioning him closely about the events on the island. Eumaeus told him everything, never dreaming that the old beggar to whom he spoke was Odysseus himself. Odysseus already knew of his mother's death, for he had spoken to her in the shade in the land of the dead. But now he heard firsthand from the loyal swineherd about the loutish behavior of the suitors and Telemachus' journey in the quest of his father. That night, Odysseus slept once more in the swineherd's hut, and as dawn lit up the sky, he was awakened by the sound of dogs whimpering. They were not barking as they would at a stranger, but greeting some long-lost friend. It was a tall young man, fit and strong. He carried the spear tipped with bronze. "It is some fine young warrior," said Odysseus. Eumaeus, wiping the sleep from his bleary eyes, replied, "It is Telemachus, come home at last." And he embraced his young master, weeping for joy. So it was that Odysseus laid eyes for the first time on the grown son whom he had left as a baby. Telemachus felt the old wanderer's eyes on him and met his glance. "Welcome, stranger. Though it is a poor welcome I can offer, who dare not even go to my own home for fear of the treachery and murder I read in the suitor's eyes." Then he turned to Eumaeus. "Old friend, please go and tell my mother that I am home, and find out how the land lies before I return to my father's place." As soon as Eumaeus had gone, the goddess Athena approached the hut. Only Odysseus could see her, for the immortals are only visible to mortals when they so choose. But the dogs must have sensed her, for they slunk away, whining and trembling with fear. And Athena beckoned Odysseus to come outside. There she told him, "The time has come to act." She touched him with her wand, and he changed back to his own appearance, if anything, stronger and younger and more handsome than before. When he returned to the hut, Telemachus, already unsettled by the dogs, started back in terror. "Are you a god?" he asked. "I am no god," said Odysseus. "I am Odysseus, prince of Ithaca, returned to claim what is mine." It was the goddess Athena who disguised me as an old man, for just as the gods themselves seem now old, now young, now man, now woman, they have the power to transform us mortals as they choose. And with that, father and son fell into each other's arms, weeping with joy. After Odysseus' long 20-year journey home, and Telemachus' long search, they had found each other at last. United, they could face the suitors. "Together," said Odysseus, "we shall scour the place clean of those vermin." "But how can that be?" asked Telemachus. "There are only two of us, and over 100 of them, all spoiling for a fight. With Athena and Zeus on our side, we do not need any further allies, replied Odysseus. Telemachus, you must go to the palace. I will follow, once more disguised as an old man. The suitors will mock me and even threaten me. Don't let your anger show. The time will soon come when they will bitterly regret every cruel word and unkind blow. When the goddess sends me a sign, I will nod to you. Then you must take down every weapon, every piece of armor in the hall, and hide them away upstairs. Tell the suitors that you do not want the weapons tarnished by the smoke from the fire, and also that you wish to prevent any quarrel among them from getting too out of hand. Leave just 2 swords, 2 spears, and 2 shields. Those are for us. A beggar at the door. When Telemachus arrived at the palace, he was greeted by his old nurse Eurycleia and by his mother Penelope. Both were in tears at his return. Then the suitors thronged around him, bidding him welcome with their lips, but looking murder from their eyes. Things might have turned ugly had not Medon, one of the few faithful servants, called the men to the table to celebrate Telemachus's return. None of the suitors had any qualms about enjoying yet another feast at Odysseus's expense. As they were dining, Odysseus came to the palace, disguised as an old beggar. Outside the doors to the courtyard, he saw an old dog lying neglected on a heap of dung. It was Argus, his faithful hound, who had been waiting patiently all the long years for his master's return. No disguise could have prevented Argus from knowing Odysseus. The old dog, too crippled and starved to move, wagged his mangy tail. He lived beyond his time, hoping against hope for his master's return. Now Argus's faithfulness was repaid, and he died content. So it was when Odysseus stumbled across the threshold of his palace, like a failing old man dressed in rags, leaning on a stick. His head was swimming with sadness. He had to sit down and rest against a pillar. Athena reappeared to him, saying, "Go to each of the suitors, and in turn beg from them. That way you may test if any are worthy to be spared." Odysseus wandered from man to man with outstretched hands and whining voice, begging for alms. Some of the men grudgingly gave him crust of bread, but none spared him a kind word. Antonis was one of the meanest and most cruel of them. "Go away, old man," he said. "Don't slobber over the table. You're putting me off my meal." "A fine man like you should have pity on an old wretch like me," replied Odysseus. "Once I was rich, and then I never turned a beggar from my door." "Then it's your own fault that you're poor now," retorted Antonis, and all the suitors laughed. Odysseus felt his anger rising. "You begrudge me a pinch of salt or a crust of bread, yet you sit there gorging on another's meat." Then he turned and walked away. Antonis, outraged at being spoken to in such tones by a mere beggar, lashed out with a stool, catching Odysseus a terrible blow on the back, below his right shoulder. But Odysseus did not stagger. He took the force of the blow and walked on, shaking his head. At that moment another beggar came into the hall. This was a young man named Iris, who, though young and strong, had never worked, preferring to live by begging. Seeing Odysseus, he cried, "Get out, old man, or I will throw you out. There is no place for you here." "I have no quarrel with you," said Odysseus. "These men have enough to spare for both of us. For no man dare refuse a beggar, knowing that the gods, who have given him health and riches, can also take them away." But Antonis, eager to see the insolent beggar beaten and driven out, shouted, "Let the two beggars make a match of it. The winner shall eat his fill." The suitors rose from the table and made a circle around Iris and Odysseus. Their jeers and mockery died in their mouths. When Odysseus hitched up his rags and they saw his strong thighs, "This old man is not as feeble as he looks," they muttered. Iris, who had thought to win an easy victory, began to shake with fear. He lashed out, striking Odysseus on the shoulder. Then Odysseus swung his mighty arm and crunched his fist into Iris's neck. Iris fell heavily to the floor, blood pouring from his mouth. Odysseus took hold of Iris by the leg and dragged him from the room. "You can sit out here among the dogs and swine," he said, dumping Iris in the courtyard. "And remember, Argus had just died, and he had seen how poorly they treated his own dog for 20 years. Odysseus returned to join the feast. The suitors made merry till nightfall, and Odysseus tended the fire, but at last they retired to their beds, and then Odysseus nodded to Telemachus. "It's time to take down the weapons from the wall." And while Telemachus saw to this, Odysseus waited by the fire. Now Penelope came into the hall to see if this beggar had any news of Odysseus. He comforted her with words, telling her that he had heard Odysseus was even then returning to his home. So Penelope called her serving maids and told them to wash the beggar's hands and feet, and to find him a place to rest, and to treat him as an honored guest, for he had spoken of her husband with such gentleness. Now the serving maids were lazy creatures, more often to be found in some dark corner with one of the suitors than by Penelope's side. They shrank from the old beggar. But Euryclea, the old nurse who had cared for Odysseus when he was a baby, willingly fetched a bronze basin and filled it with water to bathe the beggar's weary feet. While she was bathing his leg, she felt an old scar above his knee and knew her master at once. But he put his finger to her lips. "Do not betray me." So Euryclea did not say a word, though her heart was filled with a trembling joy. "Stranger," said Penelope, "I have one more question. I dreamed last night that a great eagle came down from the mountains and slaughtered all my white geese. What can it mean?" "Surely," replied Odysseus, Your dream meant that the eagle was Odysseus, come to take his vengeance on the suitors. Dreams are of two kinds, said Penelope. Some come to us through the gate of ivory, and these dreams are false. But others, Morpheus, the god of sleep, sends to us through the gate of horn, and these are true visions. I wish your interpretation were true, she went on, for now the suitors have discovered the trick by which I have kept them at bay, and my tapestry is finished. Tomorrow I must choose among them. As a test, I will set up 12 axes in a line. Odysseus used to do this, and shoot an arrow through the rings in their handles, a feat no other man could match. If anyone tomorrow can manage it, I will be his bride. And that night, Penelope lay weeping on her bed, dreading the morning. But at last Athena granted her the blessing of sleep. Odysseus lay down on a fleece by the dying embers of the fire. As he thought of the suitors, his heart growled for vengeance like a wild beast, ravening its prey. Odysseus's revenge. The next day was a feast in honor of Apollo, the god of archery, who fires the golden arrows of the sun. Penelope went to the storeroom where Odysseus had left his most precious treasures before setting off to Troy, and fetched down his carved and crafted bow and its quiver full of deadly arrows. She asked Telemachus to bury the 12 axes with their heads in the ground and their ringed handles sticking up, and then departed. Medon, the steward, summoned the suitors, and Telemachus explained to them that whoever could string Odysseus's bow and shoot an arrow through all 12 axes would win his mother's hand. Antonis laughed. "This is too easy," he said. "Even Laodes here," Antonis pointed at the weakest of them all, "could do it." And everyone cheered as Laodes picked up the bow, but he could not bend it to fit the string, nor could any of the others. They all strained with all their might. Finally Antonis himself tried, but he was no more successful. Then Odysseus rose. "Let me try," he said. "I once was a fine bowman. Let me see if I still have any strength left." "Are you mad?" asked Antonis. "Do you think a nameless wanderer could succeed where we princes have failed? You must be drunk." Odysseus took the bow, and he caressed it, feeling carefully for any weakness. But the bow was sound as ever. He took the string and attached it with little effort, as a master musician replacing the string on his lyre. It twanged beneath his fingers with a low, pure, menacing tone that drained the color from the suitors' cheeks, even as they watched him. Then Zeus let his thunder rumble across the sky. You can see it right there in the background. And Odysseus laughed at the sign of the gods' great favor. He took an arrow and fired it straight and true through the axe handles. He took a second and loosed the bow again. Antonis fell gurgling onto the table, an arrow through his neck. At first the suitors thought the old beggar had fired in error, but then they saw Telemachus step to his side. Sword appeared and spear in hand. Odysseus' voice boomed through the hall. "You curs! You thought that Odysseus would never return. You made yourselves at home in his palace, eating his food, drinking his drink, wooing his wife, and corrupting his servants. But I am back, and you all are doomed. Doomed, 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 doomed." And with that, Odysseus and Telemachus, aided by the goddess Athena, who watched in the shape of a swallow perched on the roof beam, set on the suitors and slaughtered every one. The last was cowardly Leodes, who threw his arms around Odysseus' legs to beg for mercy. But Odysseus, severed his head before the words had left his mouth. However, Odysseus spared the bard Phemius, who had sung for the suitors, for he would not kill one who was inspired by the gods. Music. Music, 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 music is next to godliness, apparently. And in the silence, after the battle, the faithful steward, Medon, crawled out unhurt from beneath a chair, where he had hidden from Odysseus' whirlwind of vengeance. All about them the bodies of the suitors lay heaped like a silver harvest that fishermen pour out from their nets onto the white sand. Odysseus ordered Medon to see that the corpses were moved, and the room cleaned and a new fire kindled. Then he unlocked the door to the women's quarters and called for Euryclea. When the old nurse saw the suitors lying dead, she could have shouted for joy, but Odysseus told her, "It is wrong to rejoice over any man's death, even your enemies. It is the will of the gods whether we live or die. Now go tell your mistress that I have returned and what has happened here." But Penelope, who had been sitting with her maids, listening to the blood-curdling cries from the hall, would not believe that her savior was Odysseus. "It must be some god who has done this thing," she said. "And besides, I could not fail to know my own husband, whatever suffering he had endured. Odysseus is dead." "No," said Euryclea, "this is Odysseus. When I washed his feet, I saw the scar on his leg." So Penelope went down to the hall. Here we have Euryclea taking towels from Penelope with an olive tree in the background. I think that's beautiful that they have an olive tree inside the house. And then here, finally, we have Penelope approaching Odysseus, as old as he looks. Odysseus was sitting against a pillar on one side of the great fire. Penelope did not go to embrace him, but instead sat on the other side of the fire. She remained there in silence, gazing at the old beggar man in his filthy rags. Sometimes, as the firelight flickered across his face, he did look like Odysseus. Sometimes he looked like a complete stranger. "You must be tired," she said to him. She turned to Euryclea. "Have the maids fetch the bed from our bridal chamber and make it up." "What do you mean?" Odysseus said angrily. "It's not possible to move my bed. I built it myself around an old olive tree. Unless someone has cut through the trunk, the bed cannot be taken out of the room. And then Penelope knew that this was indeed Odysseus, and she ran into his arms. Outside, the night air echoed with the twittering of the suitors' souls as they journeyed down to Hades. Wise Athena gave Odysseus back his own appearance, and Penelope's happiness was complete. Penelope and Odysseus embraced in the fire's glow, and their troubles at an end. Their troubles at an end. Their troubles at an end, finally. Now Odysseus's long wanderings were over, and he was at peace with the gods at last.